Hello and welcome to my Binda TV. So for now, do you think Kalonzo Musyoka should be the opposition flag bearer? Do you think Kalonzo Musyoka should be the united opposition flag bearer? Basically, Kalonzo Musyoka is the one that is touted as to be the candidate that will defeat William Ruto. Of course, President Ruto has said that he will respect the outcome of the upcoming general election. That is what President William Ruto has said. He has said he will respect the outcome of the upcoming presidential election. So for now, it appears the opposition is disunited. But for them to beat President William Ruto, they have to come up with one candidate. That is what the opposition needs to do. It needs to come up with one candidate. So who will this candidate be? That is what we need to ask, and I think the opposition needs to know that very much. What they must be able to do is to preserve unity. If they come up with unity, that is how they will be able to dislodge President William Ruto from power. So, of course, in the opposition, you have Kalonzo Musyoka, then who will be his running mate? Will it be Edwin Sifuna? Will it be Fred Matiang'i? Will it be Rigathi Gachagua? Of course, in the tip of poll, President William Ruto is leading with 24% of the vote, and then, of course, followed closely by Kalonzo Musyoka at 19%. Fred Matiang'i at 14%, and then Edwin Sifuna 10%, and Rigathi Gachagua at 9%. So you can see very clearly that Kalonzo leads the pack of the opposition candidates, and that is how then Kalonzo could position himself. Of course, Kalonzo Musyoka was the running mate to Raila Odinga in 2013 and 2017. So now he has enough experience. Of course, in 2022, Kalonzo Musyoka set aside and left the seat for Martha Karua. Of course, Mount Kenya, Ruto picking a running mate from Mount Kenya, then that meant that Raila Odinga had also to choose a running mate from Mount Kenya. So, of course, you see, in 2022, Kalonzo Musyoka sat it out. So, basically, you have Kalonzo Musyoka picking a running mate from Mount Kenya. So, basically, I think the opposition needs to be united so that then it can front one candidate. Of course, Kalonzo Musyoka is a social democrat. So, what social democrats do? They what social democrats do is that they what social democrats do is that you can never put a words on a teacher or a doctor. So basically, it's about sharing the cake equitably. That is what a social democrat does. A social democrat shares the cake equitably, and that is how then Kalonzo Musyoka his policy. So what, of course, President William Ruto accuses Kalonzo that he has not built a tarmac road to his home. 40 years now in politics. Of course, Kalonzo Musyoka started out in politics in 1986, so he has been 40 years in the rough tumble of Kenyan politics. But then, of course, it was not his job to build a tarmac road to his area. Of course, and that is the work of the sitting government. So, of course, now Kalonzo Musyoka who will he choose as his running mate? Will it be Edwin Sifuna? I think Edwin Sifuna practically appears to be the leader of the Gen Zs. That is Edwin Sifuna. Then, of course, you have another candidate that is. Fred Matiang'i. Of course, he was the de facto prime minister during President Uhuru Kenyatta's regime. So that is basically that is Fred Matiang'i. Fred Matiang'i is a crisis mode of a leader. That is Fred Matiang'i. This is a leader who, when there is a crisis, he comes along and changes things around. That is how crisis mode of leaders. A crisis mode of a leader best exemplified by the late Tanzanian President John Pombe Magufuli. That is when he wants instant results, so he will not follow democracy. Sometimes they are perceived as a dictator, but that is not what they are. They basically come in when things are not working, then they put on they put on a mantra for working. That is a crisis mode of a leader. So basically, right now, I think Fred Matiang'i could be make a formidable running mate. Of course, he also comes along with the Kisi vote, so now he is the regional kingpin of the Kisi people. That is Fred Matiang'i. Of course, Fred Matiang'i came to the limelight when he reduced the number. He acted on exam cheating in by students. Fred Matiang'i reduced the number of A's to 141 for the entire country. In the previous year, some schools had gotten over 200 A's, and then Matiang'i came along in the following year, 2016. He reduced the number of A's in the entire country to just 141. That shows you that he is a performer when given the chance. So Fred Matiang'i is a performer, and I think that is how then he could be a formidable candidate for the presidency. Of course, then other than Fred Matiang'i, you have the Gachagua. Of course, he comes in with the Mount Kenya vote. I think right now President Ruto has lost the support of Mount Kenya, and that is why he is crossing in the entire country trying to plug in the Mount Kenya vote. Of course, the Mount Kenya vote gave him 47% of the votes. He got 47%. That is William Ruto, president. He got 47% support from Mount Kenya. That is nearly half of his votes. If he loses those votes, then it will be very hard for President Ruto to get elected, and that is how then he could become a one-term presidency. Of course, Matiang'i will tot his numbers. The Mount Kenya vote, of course, he has his own party, the DCP party. Of course, now he will attempt and make it a national party so that then the party is able to go for seats that are go for the national seats. And I think DCP has performed well in the elections that have happened. Look at how DCP has performed. It has not won once, but then of course it is DCP party is trying to has put on a formidable show, and so Rigathi Gachagua will be going to the table negotiating. This is how many votes I'll bring to the table. Remember, voting in Kenya is along tribal lines. Voting in Kenya is about how many tribal votes will you bring to the table. And so Rigathi Gachagua brings on the Mount Kenya vote, and that is how he is able to cement his place as the most formidable opposition candidate. So when Rigathi Gachagua will be negotiating, he will be look at the way he commented on Fred Matiang'i. He wondered whether that was an organic gathering that Matiang'i got in Kisii when he went for his homecoming party. And I think for Rigathi Gachagua, definitely he will be the kingmaker in this election. That is Rigathi Gachagua. He will be the kingmaker. Of course, I don't think the courts have yet to allow him to run for another term, but I think that and they will allow he could be a running mate, but I don't think he could be allowed to run for president. That is Rigathi Gachagua. Of course, he knows the inner workings. He knows the secrets of the Ruto presidency. They work close together, and so he knows how Ruto got campaign money. He knows the tricks they use in order to campaign, and will want to implement some of those tricks in the running for the presidency. So, of course, that is, of course, at some point in the future, Gachagua will want to become the president of this country. But of course, then he has some little work to do. Then cut off the influence of Kithure Kindiki in Mount Kenya. Of course, Kithure Kindiki comes from the Mount Kenya East, that is Kithure Kindiki. He comes from Mount Kenya East, and I think that is how then he could have a gathering of opposition leaders that basically do the bidding. Look at Muranga Governor Irungu Kangata. Irungu Kangata said he will not defend his gubernatorial seat on a UDA ticket. So I think this thing goes to the last minute. I think in the last minute, a lot of UDA members in Mount Kenya will ditch the party for DCP. I think in the last minute they're just buying their time and then waiting for the last minute when they will ditch their they will ditch the UDA party and go for the DCP party. So I think the DCP party is spreading in Mount Kenya. Of course, Gachagua was kicked out because he had no party of his own. He trusted William Ruto, but then he was kicked out, and I think that is a mistake I think Gachagua will not allow this time round. So basically, that is it for now. So, do you think Kalonzo Musyoka has what it takes in order to become the next president of Kenya? Can he beat William Ruto? Can he beat Ruto? That is Kalonzo. Kalonzo needs to develop. Of course, he is diplomatic almost to a fault. That is Kalonzo Musyoka. He is just so much diplomatic, but he needs to learn how to fire the punches. He needs to learn how to fight in this murky Kenyan politics. Kenya has never favored a soft person to be president, and I think Kalonzo Musyoka alongside Musalia Mudavadi, they are soft people, so they need to learn the ropes of fighting hard for what you perceive is yours. Power is acquired, power is taken, it is not given. That is what we must know. Power is taken, power is not given. So Kalonzo Musyoka, knowing that power is taken, that is how he needs to learn the ropes of the election, and then that is how he will be a formidable candidate. Of course, Edwin Sifuna could give him a leg up with the youth vote. I think Edwin Sifuna could get a lot of the Gen Z votes, and that will carry Kalonzo to the top. Of course, Kalonzo Musyoka will get the combined votes, and then if he gets half of the Mount Kenya votes, and then I think he will be in good stead. And then look for the former Raila basis. Of course, Kalonzo stood by Raila up to the last minute. Of course. Much to the detriment of his own political career. So, of course, now Raila is no more. Raila was Kenya's Benjamin Franklin. Raila is no more. And, of course, now then there will be a quest to determine who will Kalonzo Musyoka forge ahead as his running mate. So basically, that's it for now. I just hope that these candidates also fight for Kenya as they are fighting for the tribal arithmetic. Of course, remember we vote along best along tribal lines. So they should also fight for what Kenyans need. Look at the teaching problems. SHA is not working. A huge unemployment. Investors are fleeing the country because of the high cost of doing business in the country. And I think that is why then we need we need a person that is going to solve our deepest challenges. The problem that we have had in Kenya is that we have had the problem that we've had in Kenya is that we elect rulers that are attracted by the trappings of power, not efficient Persian governors that utilize resources optimally so that the citizens can prosper. We have rulers are attracted by the trappings of power. So basically, they don't care if the people have the basic needs. They don't care if the people have the necessities, so long as they are in power. So Kenya has been governed by rulers, and that is why we are just not going anywhere. And that needs to change. That needs to change. If this country is going to be on the right track, then this country must be able to change. This country must be able to change to the right trajectory, and that begins with you, the voter. I beseech you, transfer your tribal allegiances to the larger Kenyan nation state. That is my urge to the Kenyan voter. Transfer your tribal allegiance to the larger Kenyan nation state. That is how you will be able to and that is how Kenya will be able to move forward, and that is how the country could be in a good state to be that country that basically is shining, that country that is, of course, people are asking, how can we be Singapore? How Oburu Odinga says that we are still going to Canada, but through Singapore. Of course, Singapore did a few things right. It rooted out corruption. It fought corruption very much. When you are corrupt in Singapore, you are hanged. You are simply hanged. There's a very huge penalty for those who steal public money. But here we look at the corrupt, we celebrate them. We say they could be corrupt, they could be thieves, but they are one of us. Look at the way we celebrate the corrupt people. They say they are one of us. They could be thieves, but then they are one of us. And so that means that we don't get to partake. That means that we don't get to partake of we don't get to partake of good leaders. There are very good leaders in Kenya, but then they don't have the money to campaign. Look at Maraga. He is asking Kenyans for donations, and Kenyans are laughing at him. So you can imagine how very much people like Maraga could change this country. Look at people like Okiom Tata. They could change this country. But then we don't have a knack for picking the best leaders. We want people that will shower us with money, not the other way around. Look at Barack Obama. He was able to be elected simply because he was able to simply because Barack Obama was able to donate to fundraise from small donations, just $10, $20. That is how he was able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to campaign for the presidency. And I think that culture of political donations must be something that we bring here at home. That culture of political donations must be something that we are able to bring here at home so that when a candidate has good policies, we elect them in, we examine them, and that is how we are able to weed out bad leaders. We are able to elect good leaders. Look at the school committee, school building committee. We elect the best. Look at the cattle dip chairman committee, chairman, cattle dip chairman. We elect the best. So look at the wedding committee chairperson. We elect the best. Look at the burial committee chairperson. We elect the best. So why do standards change when it comes to national leadership? Why do standards change all of a sudden when it comes to national leadership? Our highest angels are buried deep within, and that is why then Kenya punches below its weight. And I think what we need to be able to do is just to have a country that will be able to a country that we will be able to basically work if good leaders are able to work for us. Good leaders, if you get a bribe from a politician, that bribe of 200 shillings will feed you only for a day. That is just a fact of the matter. If you get a bribe from a politician, it will feed you just for a day only. But then, if you the right policies of a right-thinking politician, right-thinking leader will feed you for a lifetime. So why not have these policies in place? Policies from bright young leaders that are able to transform this country, and that is how we will be able to transform this country. That is how we will be able to have this country that is on a path to success. Of course, the question that has always been asked: are we able? Should we mourn that? Should we celebrate that we are not Somalia or South Sudan or other dilapidated country in Africa, or should we celebrate? Mourn that we are not Singapore or South Korea? I think the answer is that we should mourn that we are not Singapore, South Korea. These countries, they were that poor in the 1960s, but in fact, they borrowed our manifestos. These countries, they borrowed our manifestos. That is how they were able to, and that is how these countries were able to develop. They borrowed our manifestos, and that is how then they were able to develop. And I think if we follow through, look at the policies of Tom Mboya. He wanted, according to Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, Tom Mboya, Kenya lost 30 years of development as a result of the death of Tom Mboya. So you can imagine the death of Tom Mboya robbed Kenya of 30 years of development. So you can see how leaders that we have, you can see how leaders that we have brought this country down. We have assassinated our best leaders. Look at Tom Mboya, look at Piogama Pinto, look at J.M. Karaoke, look at Robert Ouko, Alexander Muge. These people were assassinated because they believe in the a larger pursuit of prosperity for all. That is how these leaders were assassinated, and they ended up and the country lost a great deal. This country is a graveyard for its prophets. That's just a fact of the matter. This country is a graveyard for its prophets. So when the prophets try and reimagine a country, they are killed, they are assassinated, and some, of course, choose to drown their frustrations in other ways, as James Gishuru did after Jomo Kenyatta came along and really laid a torment on his opposition. James Gishuru drowned his frustrations in other ways by being alcoholic and some other means. And so this country must be able to honor its prophets. Why don't we honor our prophets? That is the question I need to ask. We need to ask ourselves. Why don't we honor our prophets? Our prophets could take this country to great places, but we don't honor our prophets. That's just is the fact of the matter. And this is why in this coming presidential election, I will hope that that is why in this upcoming general election, I will hope that we honor our prophets. We choose the leaders that are able to work for us. They should be working for us. We are the ones who have employed these leaders, not the other way around. When they are utilizing our public money, we have given them trust that they act on behalf of the people. So basically, we are their bosses. So let's come 2027 and let's fire those leaders that don't inspire us. Let's fire those leaders that basically, let's fire those leaders that are not working for us. And that is the essence of elections. Otherwise, you will find that democracy really has to work for us. Or maybe we could go the route of maybe what Zambian American economist Dr. Dambisa Moyo says. Dr. Dambisa Moyo says that Dr. Dambisa Moyo says that there should be a civic test for voters because voters and only those who pass the civic test be allowed to vote. She says that in her book Age of Chaos because voters don't know the weight of their decisions. That is why, and then they should be asked to, and that is why these voters must sit for a civic race so that only those who pass gets to vote. And I think that is something that we should be exploring. That is, how do we make the voter enlightened? I think at present, the voting patterns of the university professor and his illiterate cousin in the village is exactly the same. What is the surname of the electoral candidate? That is what we should be knowing, that the voting patterns of the university professor and his illiterate cousin in the village is exactly the same. What is the surname of the electoral candidate? If they have the same surname, that is, if they are from my tribe, then I elect them. And if they don't come from my tribe, no matter how talented, no matter how capable they are, I will not vote for them. That is what informs the voting patterns of a Kenyan, and this is why this country is not moving. This is why this country is still at a standstill. And I think if this country continues on this trajectory, then we should have ourselves to blame. Basically, we should have ourselves to blame if this country is not able to move forward. Why? Because the fact of the matter is that the voter just does not know how to identify a capable leader. That is how then they elect all these big thieves, these drug traffickers, these murderous people, these big thieves are able to be elected because we don't trust we don't vet leaders based on the qualities of a good leader. Can he work for me? Can she work for me? Is her character beyond reproach? That is the sort of questions we should be asking. Is her character the character of the leader I want? Is it beyond reproach? So coming to back to Kalonzo, I think he's above reproach. I've never heard Kalonzo Musyoka be mentioned in a corruption scandal. I've never heard, frankly, all these years, I've never heard the name of Kalonzo Musyoka in a corruption scandal. So you can imagine that basically he is able to stay above that. Of course, I know Kenyan politicians are above, are very highly remunerated. They are among the highest paid people, politicians in the world. If you consider the pay of a Kenyan politician, 1 million shillings per month, that's comparable to an American politician. And I think an American politician gets about 800,000 shillings a month. But then the American economy is 40 times larger than the Kenyan economy. So you can imagine the American economy is 40 times larger than the Kenyan economy. So basically, that means that this country is just not able to punch its weight, and this is why I think we should reduce the salaries of our politicians. Our politicians are earning so much, but then the people are starving. So this is a kleptocratic country where the politicians are stealing the money meant for us, and this is why this country is not moving in the right direction. And I think if we want to move in the right direction, then we better elect leaders that will be there for us, leaders that will ensure this country is on the correct path to prosperity. That is how we will be able to have leaders that can turn the page. This country can turn. This country can turn around. We should be a $1.6 trillion economy, not the party $150 billion. We should be a $1.6 trillion economy. We should be the 10th, 11th largest economy in the world, like South Korea. Why is Kenya not South Korea? Why is Kenya not Singapore? This is why I guess this time round the politicians must be able to sit down and hammer out what really Kenya must achieve in order to be Singapore, in order to be South Korea. Number one, what's the character of our leaders? Number two, how do we strengthen the economy? I think anyone that has no plan on the Kenyan economy must be able to. Anyone that has no plan for the Kenyan economy, what use do we have for them? These people that have no plan for the Kenyan economy, of what use do we have for them? That is something that we must interrogate. So, of course, you have Kalonzo Musyoka, and I hope he is a social democrat. Of course, a social democrat is a left of center politician who wants the cake to be shared equitably. I think, according to a report by the Daily Nation some few years ago, for every shilling a poor person makes, a rich person in Kenya makes 56 shillings. So you can imagine that is for a very for every shilling a poor person in Kenya makes, a rich person makes 56 shillings. So you can imagine the kind of wealth disparities in Kenya. And I think that is something that I think we must explore. Why is it that the gap between the rich and the poor in Kenya is so wide? We have inequality. For South Africa, you could say it is because of apartheid, where the wealth was spread with whites gaining more wealth than the blacks. For South Africa, it could be explained. But why is there such wide wealth disparities in Kenya? That is something that we must ask ourselves and begin to remedy that situation. Let's give free quality higher education all the way up to university. That is the way to make people escape poverty, and of course be able to make people escape poverty and be able to have people that have the skills for the jobs needed. Are we training for the skills, or are we just training in so much theory that will not help someone when they graduate? So we need people that are able to we need people that are able to get a job post graduation. And what are we doing about job creation? That is what we must ask. Do we have venture capital to be able to inject capital into very brilliant ideas? Believe you me, there is a Kenyan with a better idea than Google. There is a Kenyan with a better idea than Microsoft. There is a Kenyan with a better idea than YouTube. I can't guarantee you, but the idea is in their bedrooms, in safely in their mattresses, because they have not found someone to inject capital into their business. And this is what then this country must be able to change. We need at least a venture capital of about 100 billion shillings so that it can go to these brilliant youngsters that are able to start their own ventures and eventually succeed. That's how to make this country succeed. And that's how to make this country prosper. And I think if we did this, then we could be on a trajectory to development. That is how this country could be. This is how this country could turn around and ensure that we are truly on a pathway to prosperity. And that will be great. We can create 2 jobs for every Kenyan. We can really create two doors for every Kenyan. That is how we will be able to have a country that truly ticks, a country that is at the absolute bleeding edge of innovation. I think look at Kenya. There is a Kenyan project manager at Google. There is a Kenyan project manager at Microsoft. There is a Kenyan project manager at Meta, Facebook, basically. But why don't we have Kenyan versions of these companies? That is what we must ourselves very much. So basically, this is something that I think a president will be able to announce. This is what I think a good president will be able to announce. This is how this country can turn around. This is how this country can go from poverty to prosperity within a generation. Then basically be able to. In a generation, then basically be able to draw on the support of Kenyans. We are a happy, blessed people. Of course, I know we have made some trades. I know Kenya is the most developed non-mineral economy in Africa. Of course, overall, we're the sixth largest economy in Africa. I think we went past Angola, but that is still not enough. That sixth place is not enough for us to alleviate poverty in Kenya. We need to increase that, and we need to go places. We need industrial activity to increase. That is how we are able to, and that is how we are able to have a country that moves forward, a country that is able to punch its weight. For how long will we continue to be on the runway? For how long will Kenya continue to be on the runway? We have been on the runway for far too long, and I think that is something that we must interrogate. That is something that truly we must be able to interrogate. That is the way we will be able to build this country so that then this country can function. This country awaits us. This country is for us. It has given us many beautiful blessings, but then unfortunately, our leaders have squandered opportunities for self advancement, and this is why we don't get to advance very much. So basically, what do you think? Do you think Kalonzo Musyoka will take this country to places we have never been? Do you think Kalonzo Musyoka has what it takes to get this country to places we have never been to? So basically, that will be your decision to make in August 2027 next year. And so this is something that I hope a lot of our politicians will be able to, and for the voter, you gauge your presidential candidate according to what you think they can do for you, not according to the pride, not according to the tribe. If you vote according to the tribe, then you will get the leader you deserve, a leader that will squander your money, a leader that will steal your money, a leader that will take your money as his own personal fortune. That is what you will get. But I think if you elect a leader that is going to work for you, then that's how we will be able to have leaders that are able to have leaders that are able to work for us, leaders that will be there for us. This is how we can transform this country around and ensure that it becomes that shining city on the hill, that shining city on the hill, and then we will be a role model for Africa. Then after Kenya, then the rest of Africa will be liberated. That is how we will be able to turn around this country. That is how this country can move from third world to first world within a generation. And I think that is the way that we should be going. That is the way that we should be striving towards. And let's not kill our brilliant sons and daughters that have the much potential. Let's not silence them. These brilliant leaders that we always silence could be the ones that could remake this country and enable this country to really punch its weight. And this is how then we will be able to make a country that is able to alleviate poverty and basically be the country that is able to have an improved standard of living and be able to be that shining city on the hill. So I think that is it for now. Bye for now.